everybody, what's going on? Look, it's great to be with you all today. So, one of the people I'm really excited to talk to is the next guest, Jason Riddle. And here's what you may not know about Jason, because he hasn't been out there trying to get a lot of credit for it, because it's really just, I think, something that's weighed on his heart. But he, was part of the January 6th stuff, and we'll talk about that. But then, was offered one of these blanket pardons by Donald Trump and actually proactively rejected that pardon, which I think is truly is a testament to character, a testament to understanding of, of, I guess, being held accountable for action. So, Jason, welcome, man. It's great to have you.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
And so, Jason, you were, what I know about you, too, I know a few things, but you were also a Navy veteran, correct?
Yes, I served active duty in the Navy, and I was in the Army Reserves.
Nice. So I was the reserves is a good way to go. Although the Navy's great, the reserves, the whole 1 week in a month thing's great. But I was an Air National Guardsman. So what did you do in the Navy?
I was a quartermaster. I was in navigation.
Cool. Yeah. Well, good. Well, listen. I want to talk to you a little bit about your story, but why don't you, just for the sake of everybody here, kind of talk a little about who you are, kind of where you grew up, and then I want to get into the kind of, let's say Donald Trump comes on the scene and how he's, how he kind of draws some folks in.
Okay. Well, my name's Jason. I'm from Connecticut originally. Let's see. A little bit of a thrill seeker, I think. I'm gay too. I don't know if that matters. I'm an emotional person, so I'm kind of loud sometimes. And when I joined the Navy, actually, it was don't ask, don't tell was in place, so I wasn't even allowed to be in. So I kind of had this weird relationship with my government, from the beginning. And I was in the Army Reserves by the time Trump came to the scene. I was majoring in political science at Southern Connecticut in New Haven, and I was leaning towards voting towards Jeb Bush. I supported Obama in his first run, and then I felt like he didn't pull us out of Iraq like he was supposed to, so I won, and I thought a Republican would, and as Donald Trump came along, and it's just started a conversation that never went away. After I watched the first debates, and I think that's I kind of got hooked into the Trump movement. It was actually his opening line during the debate when he was hit with a pretty hard question, and you called women pigs. You said this about them, and he said only Rosie O'Donnell, and he took control of that crowd. And I was enraptured by him too, and I took it to class, and I became friends with the person I'd end up storming the Capitol building with. Well, he drove down to DC with me. He didn't cross any barriers, but he went down to DC with me for the Stop the Steal. And it was him and I who went to rallies together, and he moved his schedule around, actually, so we'd have classes together, and we would take what was bothering everybody, and the school was full of liberals and Bernie supporters, and they were just so disgusted with Trump, and it was me and we were older than most of the students, and we would just it would be him and I versus the other students in almost all our classes. And I got a lot of negative attention for it, and I enjoyed it. And I also I was becoming a very heavy drinker. And actually, after college too, I graduated, and I in the Army Reserves, I stopped showing up for my drills. I missed my last 6 months of drills, and it was the beginning of me literally betraying my country for Trump, because it was my decision, it was my mistake. I own it. But part of my rationalization at the time was I'm doing more for my country by going to Trump rallies than I am going to my 1 weekend a month. And but I moved up to New Hampshire in 2015 or 16. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I was up here when the election happened, and I remember it just people I didn't even talk to or reaching out to me. That's how loud I was about my obsession with Trump, and I was just known. It kind of took over my identity. I was just more a Trumper than I was anything else. And my drinking got completely out of control, and I had become a correctional officer, and I'd gotten fired from corrections, and that's when my Trump impersonating really took on a new level, a scary level. I told my superintendent of the jail I got fired from corrections that I'm going to run for county commissioner and fire him, and I started a social media campaign. I just started harassing the superintendent and start harassing the administrators of the jail, and people liked it. And I grew a following. I had like 5,000 followers. They thought it was great. The superintendent, he had fired a correctional officer like every week, and that's why I became a conservative unionist. Don't ask me how I tried to rationalize that, and that's
kind of how I was. So.
I found a lot of people who were pro union, but also gotten fired, and all these other. I became parallel beliefs with all these other people that followed, and they were my following all the way up till January 6th. I got hired at the post office after I got fired from corrections, but I mean, I was a full-fledged drunk by then. I was waking up drinking and bringing the booze with me on my routes. And I loved the college dorm routes because there would just be beers sitting out everywhere. And I'd sometimes like literally play beer pong with college students while I'm supposed to be delivering mail.
Wow.
And the friend that I'd been in school with, he'd gotten fired too. And neither of us blamed ourselves, of course. It's obviously everyone else's fault in our mind. And he would be free all day, and I'd have my Bluetooth in, and we would just talk to each other all day long. And we would just blame everyone else for our problems. And being at the post office too, Trump started attacking the voting ballots, and I was working. I was seeing it firsthand, all this political mail, and it was just reinforcing all these wrong ideas I had. And when there was the call to come down to January 6th, Paul and I didn't even talk about it. We just knew we were going. And I quit. I drunkenly abandoned my truck at the post office. I brought it in, clocked out, never went back. That was shortly before New Year's. And, I by then knew I had a problem and I needed to fix it. But first I have to go down to stop the steal. That's more important. And I think it was just like mostly because of this following I had on social media. It was the only thing I had. Yeah. I was like, my husband was done with me. He was on his way out. My family was done with me. I had no real friends. I couldn't hold a job. And so yeah, we went down there, and it turned into a riot. And it didn't seem really weird to me that it turned into a riot. It still freaks me out sometimes seeing the surveillance pictures of myself just completely at ease with it. And I did what a drunk does and raided a liquor cabinet, and it got me arrested. And it wasn't until after I did the interview where I said I'm running for Congress and confused who I'm running through that the probation figured out that I'm still drinking, and they forced sobriety on me. And life's been getting better ever since. And
it's funny. Well, let me just say the funny thing is, you said you raided a liquor cabinet at the Capitol. There's plenty of them there, so it probably wasn't hard for you to find. Listen, let me just first off say how much I you almost had me at tears at a couple points. How much I deeply respect your honesty. And look, it's really, this is what people I think need to understand is the easiest thing to do. And you see this all the time. The easiest thing for people to do is to be a victim. And then to if you look into kind of the abyss of where your life is, to turn and blame somebody else, right? And you see this all the time. And there is something, and I want to get to it eventually, but there's something or a series of things that kind of gave you the courage to take ownership, right? Which is not easy to do. But by the way, you made the comment about, it's the beginning of my betrayal of my country, and I understand where you're coming from on that. I do want to point out that Donald Trump dodged the draft and happened to never serve his country in any capacity, which I think is important. So let's go back kind of to the beginning. So you mentioned, obviously, you're gay, you're in the military, and you feel like, it's don't ask, don't tell. So the secret is basically you can't tell anybody you're gay. The government's not supposed to ask. Was that kind of the beginning, or did that really have nothing to do with kind of the hostility towards the government? Was there a little animosity there? Was that just kind of life as normal, and you were typically conservative, which is naturally more hostile to the government? Where did that kind of come from in your mind?
When they governed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I remember the officer came in and explained it to us, and he basically said, I don't like it, you don't like it, but they're allowed in. And then like all these people I thought were friends or just kind of saying what they would do if they find out someone's gay. And I was like, really? And it was just confused, I guess is the best way to put it. And I got in this habit of hanging out with certain people thinking because I had to. And just all these contradictions is constantly going in my head. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, I liked the attention that I got from it too. I created a shirt that said LGBT for Trump, and I
Mm-hmm.
wore it to Trump rallies. And I noticed that always pissed people off, and I just loved the attention I got for that. And I never offered a real explanation, and because I didn't have one for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the times. And I think I noticed I'm not the only one too of the Trump supporters who aren't extremely political. They don't have real political opinions. They just like the involvement.
Yes.
And I noticed it was just like I felt like I was involved. I chose political science over history. I'm a history buff because I think it was honestly just because it was easier. And it was like
Mm-hmm.
easier for me to just go to rallies. And I thought I missed out on that fraternity aspect that people get after high school when I was kind of chasing a party scene, but in a sophisticated manner. So I was telling myself, well, I'm going to political rallies and I'm a political science major. This is a good thing. But the only thing I did at them was get drunk and
Mm-hmm.
cheer and get excited when I saw a fight broke out, and I got
Mm-hmm.
used to violence. And it was kind of this like a formation of criminal behavior that it wasn't really criminal in the beginning. It just, I was close to it and I was used to it. And then also becoming a correctional officer, that feeded it too. I was just on both sides of this. And I remember like I was joking with one Capitol police officer during the riot. I remember going to him and being like, I hope you're getting paid triple time for this. And he even got a little laugh. And I kind of liked being close to everybody and thinking I'm friends with everyone, when in reality I was just like kind of drifter.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You and I have a lot more in common because so I think back to my time in college. First off, I took political science because it was easy. And I don't think it was necessarily easy. It's just I knew politics, right? Since I was a kid, I had paid attention to politics. So it's kind of like one of those natural things, and maybe the case with you too. And I also, in my college, so I was in college, what was it, 96, I guess, to 2000. I graduated in 2000 from Illinois State. And I was always the lone conservative in class. And I loved it. What I loved was like, I don't know. There's a sense that you get like, I kind of empowered when you're standing kind of alone and defending a thing. There's also like, I don't know, it makes you feel good about yourself because you're like, oh, I'm standing here challenging. Whatever it was, I was the same boat. And I understand it like, of course, back then there was no MAGA, and it was just kind of like, do you want a 38%, top tax rate or 35%? Those were the things we were arguing over. But I can understand it. The other thing is, by the way, I was at the very first debate. I was a Jeb guy. I was a Jeb surrogate. So we were sitting in the very front row. That's back when Jeb had hope of winning. And I remember sitting, I'm like probably 30 feet from Donald Trump or 40 feet when he says his comment about Rosie. And I just remember thinking, oh, this guy's a joke. He's not going to get through. But it's like looking back. So looking back on that time, I can see that there was like this kind of sociological kind of political wave that was developing, this underpinning. And what it was people just they felt very disaffected from politics. They wanted somebody just to come and blow up the system. And he did that. And, people like me didn't take him seriously until all of a sudden he's the nominee. I'll say as a quick aside, I think there is this deep desire in the country that is not fully recognized right now of people that want to heal the system. So I think just like Donald Trump kind of came in on a storm, I feel like there could be a uniter that comes in on a storm as well. So now, okay, so what I think is really important, you talk about MAGA as part of your identity. And this is when I try to talk to folks. One of the things that I think I can bring to the table when discussing, because I'm still a Republican. I'm still a conservative at heart, right? Moderate, I would say. One of the things I can bring to the table with people is to say, like, look, this isn't about arguing against somebody's policies. So I could sit down with your typical kind of Trump supporter and say, hey, here's why the big beautiful bill is bad, or, here's why tariffs don't work, whatever it is. But it's not mostly about policy, unless, of course, if the economy collapses and people get burned, that's a different story. But it becomes an identity. It becomes something you belong to. It becomes like who you are, your social circle, especially when you said, that you're kind of struggling for purpose, you're struggling for like social interaction, and that becomes that. Talk a little more about that. Like, at what point Do you think that kind of Trump went from I'm going to support him because I like that he said something about Rosie, I like defending him kind of alone with my buddy here in front of a bunch of liberals, to like you really kind of bought into this identity of it and it became your social circle? Can you talk about kind of like when you think that happened, and did you notice that happen, or was it something you have to look back on and be like, oh yeah, that took place, right?
I think getting fired from corrections, that's when I took on like it as the way I was acting as a person. And I just truly, I was thinking, what would Donald Trump do in this situation
Yeah.
before everything I did? And I wasn't the only person being, it wasn't like nobody was telling me to. There were people telling me like, this is unhealthy. And I knew it was, but I was just kind of stuck in it. And I couldn't, it was mostly the booze too. When you're drunk all the time, it's hard to rationally think. And that's what it was. Getting forced on me is really when I woke up and looked back and went, wow, I can't believe I like, and it seems like it happened yesterday too. It's like this wind tunnel that I just somehow fell into and didn't, and I woke up in the jail cell the next day. I woke up in my own jail that I used to be a correctional officer at.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. The FBI surrounded my apartment, and I remember looking out, and I was already drunk. Between the Capitol riot and when I got arrested, I was looking out my window hammered the whole time, just in the dark. I was waking up on the floor, and
so you basically had no 20. You were just kind of like waking up, drinking, passing out, waking up, drinking, passing out.
Yeah, for a couple weeks. I was drinking when the FBI showed up to question me. I found, like, I drank all the booze and I started rummaging in places and found a nip that someone gifted to my husband for Blue Label, which is like $40 a nip. And I put that in milk and was drinking that when the FBI showed up to question me. And then, and then when they came to arrest me, I look out the window and I remember seeing one FBI agent on a cell phone, and my phone rang and I picked it up and he's like, all right, so you're going to come out peacefully? And I was like, yeah, can I brush my teeth? I remember asking him to brush my teeth, and he said, you can brush your teeth and come out. And I said, okay. And it was a handle of Jim Beam in the kitchen, and I filled up a pint glass to like all the way to the top, and I chugged it. And I remember them arresting me, and I remember them actually taking off my handcuffs to deal with my cat. And then I woke up in my jail cell the next day to my old boss, a former supervisor of mine, who's still supervisor, telling me that I told the judge to go fuck herself.
Wow.
And so that's when they put the red flag with the drinking. And then, but then I kept the drinking going as soon as they let me out. Lied to the probation officer through my teeth, but she looked around my apartment. It was booze all over it, and she knew what was going on. And then I did this interview, and the following Monday they were putting in a violation order for sobriety on me, and I knew I had like a month. I talked to my lawyer. I forget if it was 2 weeks or a month, but I gotta like quit. I was like, I knew it was like a physical addiction at that point.
Yeah.
And so I started weaning myself off, and I actually was able to quit on my own for 2 weeks. I remember holding on to that, being all proud of it. 2 weeks on my own. But then they put me on this breathalyzer, and then it kept me sober for till the time I had to report to prison. It was 11 months. And that's when I was starting to understand what I was doing and what I'd fallen into and what I was actually chasing. But I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to say, okay, my political views changing really just because I got sober. But people died, and that event is what brought this huge life change about. And if I don't acknowledge that, if I pretend that it's because of some heroic act I did on January 6th trying to stop the steal, then I'm carrying on with the same lie that brought me down there in the first place. And it's also so disrespectful to the people who lost their lives. And those are the people who I think about the most, and why I'm doing this.
Listen, I'm trying to figure out where I want to go with this. So on the drinking side of things, I know a number of people that have been swallowed up in alcohol, and we've all had. I've gone through times where I was drinking too much as well, and you realize like once you kind of pull away from that, there's something about being able to wake up sober and sober and sober when you kind of see your life differently, and like sobriety kind of what is it like? It kind of reinforces sobriety because you realize you feel better and things like that. Do you think if you wouldn't, let's say you wouldn't have let's say you wouldn't have been arrested for January 6th. When were you arrested, by the way? When did the FBI show up after the 6th? How much
They showed
later?
up. They showed up to question me 2 weeks later, and then I was
Okay.
arrested pretty not long after. I think it was like 2 weeks and 2 weeks. I don't remember the exact dates.
So had that not happened, do you think you would have come on your own to this understanding that you need to stop drinking? Was that kind of the impetus to do it? Where do you think you would have been on something like that?
I've been thinking about this actually because of so I watched videos in the January 6th hearings, and one time you brought up like all these people with all these crazy ideas are now out there in regards to the pardons. I was in a different YouTube, obviously not the hearing, but there's another rider who I like to Google him, see what he's doing, because I got put in minimum security prison a year after the riot and got forced sobriety right before me. I had a very cushy, how self-reflecting time, compared to this other writer I like to look up. His name is Brendan Fellows, and he
Yeah,
was
I know
similar.
the name.
He was similar behavior. He was like smoking a joint, and he was causing all this commotion after his arrest, and he was having fun with it. And he got held in DC jail from the time of the riots, and he got put in the Patriot wing next to
Wow.
these right-wing militias. And now he's going to Trump rallies, and he's wearing ice jackets, and he's a Trumper. And I like to. It's almost like looking at a parallel universe, because I think if I didn't have this transition that I had, where now I have all this support. My husband, my marriage is saved, and we're
Good.
moving together, and things are good. Like I think I very could be showing up today at DC Trump rallies and Trumping, and just doing the same thing. People who don't change anything.
You know what's interesting is and this is something I noticed. So after January 6th, everybody basically that was there, as far as I know, was remorseful, like publicly remorseful. And I would hear so many comments of people that are like, it got out of hand. I didn't realize it, whatever. Right. And then at some point, and I think this coincides with when Kevin McCarthy met with Trump, and there was basically this kind of conscious decision that Republicans were going to continue with Trump again. The right wing media ecosystem, like Fox News, came in and kind of surrounded the folks, particularly in DC jail, and started calling them victims. And Trump then came in with the whole political prisoner stuff. And what I saw amazingly was a transition of a lot of people that had initially taken ownership for their action to then a lot of people that would talk about how they were victims and abused. And I mean, again, it's because Donald Trump is very good at coming alongside of you and telling you it's not your fault. And if you look at dark figures throughout history, this is how they come to power. They come along and say, nothing's your fault. We got to blame a group of people. Maybe it's the liberals. In the past, it was the Jews. There's always somebody to blame for your problems. And in this case, people that, truly look, I don't know if you fully know my story, but obviously I was there on January 6th on the other side of you. And I had left the floor of the House as the insurrectionists basically broke the barrier down, and we hadn't been evacuated yet. I went back to my office, and I remember going up, and I opened the door, which is the window behind my desk, which overlooks the west front of the Capitol where everybody was at, and I just hear like bang, pop, boom, explosions, and it was when DC Metro showed up. So the DC Metro Police showed up. It allowed Capitol Police to kind of retreat into the Capitol building. And DC Metro started using non-lethal to try to control the crowd, and it didn't work either. But I just remember this real sense, and I've never felt this in my life, and I've been to war, this real sense of just darkness. Like it just felt, when I heard this and when I saw this, I just felt like this sense of darkness kind of creep over, like, I think it was a spiritual feeling. If you don't believe in God, to people that don't believe in God, then it was whatever you want to call emotional. I don't know. But it just felt dark. And I think what you see from that is it was just this energy of, I mean, the vast majority of people out there were good people that when you put them in a mob and you kind of, and I think there was a lot of hostility still for 6 months prior from the BLM riots. That energy carried over to, well, they can riot, we can riot. And it just created this kind of toxic soup of, what it turned out to be. And I think just as a country, we could have been, we would be in such a better place if we would have just taken ownership of that. As Republicans, I mean, this is one of the things I was preaching about is like, if we would just come out and say, look, the Republican Party owns this. We went too far. I'm sorry, guys, the election wasn't stolen. We will never do this to you again. I mean, the country would be, miles down the road towards healing. But instead, we didn't do that. So I don't know. It's pretty crazy. So you talk about kind of how you transitioned to that moment of clarity, and was there a period when you became sober, you kind of started seeing your life and the turns it had taken? Was it immediately like kind of a wake up of, boy, I screwed up, I was misled, or I misled myself? Did that take time to kind of get there? Were you resisting against this idea that you've made some bad decisions, or was it like a moment of clarity where you just kind of woke up and you're like, holy balls, how did we get here?
Prison definitely made it worse, which is why I like to look at what Brennan Fells is doing, because I think I would have I showed up, the first thing correctional officer said to me was, let's go, Brandon. And all the rules of prison were broken within the first day when people came up to me and gave me gifts. Like, people just gave me shoes. Like, that's the first rule of prison. Nothing's free. And like on day one, they're like, "You're at the." There was a mafia guy waiting for me in my cell who wanted to meet me because I was at the riot. He was like, "You were at the riot?" It's like, I left there thinking I was hot shit. I thought I was so cool, and I was like, I'm gonna really run for Congress. And I went and signed up. I went to the city hall and signed up to run for Congress. But like in the back of my head though, like, you're starting to be disgusted by everything Trump says. I thought, I was like, maybe I'll just be the Thomas Jefferson I am and not, just try to ignore Trump. But when he got prosecuted and when he got I'm sorry, excuse me, not when you get arrested, before you get arrested.
Oh, indicted, yeah.
Yeah, when he got indicted, he asked people to come out and protest, and that was the moment of clarity when I realized I had an obsession with the man, because I fought in almost personal terms with him. I was like, how can you do that, Trump? Someone can get hurt. Look what happened on January 6th. And like that, I just like kind of laughed to myself, and I was like, you don't know him. He doesn't know you. He doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about anybody. And that's why he's asking people to come out and protest. And that's when I was like, I'm done. And I like put on Facebook at first, I'm going to support Kennedy. And then I was like, I'm going to just stop doing this. And I went to City Hall. I was like, can I withdraw the candidacy? Like, no, you can't. I was like, okay, great. So I had to keep my name on the ballot, but I deleted all my social media and just kind of walked away from being a Trumper. But with everything that with the Capitol Police and the Metro Police, what they've been going through since, I felt like I need to do I got to counteract the damage I've done so far. So I donated to the Harris campaign and I signed up to volunteer, but it was there was a lot of awkward conversations between the Harris campaign about volunteering and myself, just a couple emails back and forth. And they did want me to go door knock. And
Hey, Jason, I had awkward conversations with the Harris campaign too, and I spoke at the convention, so don't worry about that.
Yeah. So like I was like, I'm just going to vote. And I thought Harris was going to win, and I was like, okay, with being the convict, and because it's what we are, and we all broke crimes on committed crimes on January 6th, and just seeing, and one thing that also just researching this interview before talking to you, I started researching Brian Sinek, and I saw surveillance videos of Julian Cater and George Tanios, and they were standing right next to me. Like, I was right next to people who hosed a cop with bear spray, and they brought 2 cans of bear spray and 2 cans of mace and sprayed him and hosed him with police. And I was standing right next to him, and I was celebrating it.
Yeah.
And, these people are getting presidential pardons, and then Brian Sinek's dead. And, and since then, Howard Liebing, Jeffrey Smith, Gunther Hashida, Kyle Day Fratak, those are heroes. Like, there was no hero. It was a crime. It was the bottom barrel of my life, and it sucks that I was there, but I had to acknowledge it if I want to go up from there. And
so let me ask you, really 2 questions. Well, what's okay? Let's first get into the pardon. So you get the pardon because it's given to everybody, and you proactively say no. It's not just maybe it was easy for you, like as a decision, but it also was actually hard to do it because you had to actually seek out, like proactively do things to not receive this pardon, right? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, at first it seemed just kind of the Trump style way. I just said it and did some interviews saying I refused the pardon. But there's more to it. I saw in the news Pam Hemphill
Mm-hmm.
went through, through her senator and was able to get an official refusal. And so I reached out to Maggie Hassan's office here in New Hampshire, and they were a little reluctant to help me. The first email I got said that we're not going to help you. And then I said, okay, but I'm going to do some interviews with the news. I just want to make sure you're hearing you correctly. You are not going to help me do this. And then I got someone else who said they are going to help me.
Like, oh yeah, guess what? We're helping you.
So they said they are, and they did confirm they are to the news when I did the interview with WMUR. It's been a couple weeks, and I haven't heard since. I don't know. No, I know it takes some time. But it was initially an impulse just as soon as I heard of it, because it's repulsive. But it is necessary. Trump is going to eventually die, and this movement's going to go with it. And the pardon's an act of grace, so people are accepting this act of grace from the guy who caused the riot, who took all these people's lives. And I'm no, thank you, and not interested.
That's well said. Now, so what has life been like? Well, I can tell you a little of my story first, and which is when I made the decision to go against Trump and I joined the January 6th committee, and and that all started. I was always kind of hostile to Trump his whole first term, but would support him when I could, and then the night of the election when he said the election was stolen, I very loudly said no, it hasn't been. And part of the reason, Jason, is because I just think, like, democracy, I always cared about foreign policy stuff. And one of the things I was really passionate about was democracy building, not like at the end of a gun, but just like, civil society and the importance of democracy around the world. And I realized that the thing that actually would determine if a democracy fails is not like, it's not the economy. It's not even do people agree on anything. It's like, do people agree that the system by which they elect people works? That's it. That's the only thing you have to agree on. Like, if you can go vote, your vote counts, the person that wins exercises power in a certain position for a certain amount of time. If that's all you agree on, like, democracy will work. It's like playing baseball. If you're at the, Wrigley Field, everybody just assumes when you hit the ball, you have to run to first base, second base, third base, and home to score. Well, if Wrigley Field says, no, look, the Cubs, all they have to do is run to third and then home, and we're going to count it, you're breaking the rules that you've all agreed on, and the game falls apart if people are playing by their own rules. And so, I was very outspoken, very loud, but one of the things I've experienced, and it took me, to be quite honest with you, getting out of Congress after the January 6th stuff to take full inventory of the fact that it had a massive psychological impact on me. Because what I didn't realize at the time, because it's like in combat, you don't get post-traumatic stress during combat. It's post, right? Because that's when you have the time to think about it. I realized the relationships I lost. My identity was as a Republican U.S. congressman, which is a pretty powerful identity. I lost the Republican part of that. I had half of my family, not my immediate family, but extended family, that sent me a certified letter saying I was part of the devil's army. My co-pilot in Iraq told me that I'm a sellout, and he was ashamed to have ever flown with me. I mean, and I could go down the list. And the point is, if you find your identity in something like that, and then all of a sudden you're kicked out of it, it's psychologically really difficult. And you have to come to that. And I think this is what's important for people to understand. When we get asked the question all the time, well, why don't people see this? Why don't they just come out? Why don't they just do this? Why, or they don't understand the kind of self-reflection or courage it took for you to do it. Why don't you talk about, if there was any, but what that impact was when you basically made the decision to step away from MAGA? Was it all positive? Was there some psychological aspects you had to deal with in terms of that identity? Just talk a little about that.
Well, it turned into a routine of I was basically just buying my friends like at bars by and I kept the routine going at the very end. And I was working at FedEx when I had to go to prison, and they kept their job for me when I came out, and I was a little bit of a cheerleader for Trump, and we'd write Trump 2024 on the back of the truck in the dust, and but it was the same routine, and I recognized it from before I had to go to prison, so it wasn't necessarily too hard. I just basically abandoned my social life, and yeah, I mean, there's a couple friends I had at FedEx that we consider each other pretty decent friends that I bump into them now at the gym and walk right by me, don't even acknowledge I exist.
Wow.
And that's okay. I'm not trying to be the guy going out and being friends with everybody anymore. I'm happy living the married life, and work likes me too. That's a new thing.
Good. That's nice.
Boss likes me too. New thing. I'm not. I was going to work every day with my heart racing, wondering what. Because I would get drunk at work all the time. In fact, that was like the moment I realized I was like alcoholic was when I was a correctional officer and I was drinking a nip in the locker room and a code came off and I had to go running, and it was a guy having a seizure from withdrawals from alcohol, and I'm literally choking down a nip, and I was holding this dude's head, looking into his face, thinking, "This is going to be you."
Wow.
And so it was just, I was just tired of this routine that I established by the time I said I was done with Trump. And I was like, I'm thinking of my 5,000 Facebook friends before I deleted the Facebook. And I was just like, you don't know these people. Like,
Yeah.
it's just a sea of negativity that I was just, and it's been so good. It's been a good feeling. It's nice thinking for myself. There's no two versions of the truth. I don't have to worry about what someone else thinks before I try to figure out what's going on. And refusing this pardon too has really helped with that being identified as an insurrectionist or as a pro-Trumper to people who don't know me, strangers after the riot were saying "good for you" to me. Like one time I was at AutoZone and he asked me for my name, for the discount, and I said my name, and he's like, "Oh man, I wish I was down there with you. Good for you." And I was just like, if every 4 years, everyone got in their cars and drove to DC to protest, that's the end of democracy. They don't even realize it. Trump has made it mainstream being anti-democracy. And it's because he also doesn't tell people to separate it from their social lives. Like, he uses people. So he's okay with people taking it to the dinner table, taking it out to restaurants. And I'm a waiter now. And sometimes I got a guy with a MAGA hat, and I just give him his food, give him his check, and I go on my way. I don't need to get in an argument with a complete stranger. Like we don't need to know each other's political beliefs to coexist.
Isn't that funny? It's funny because I've recently been kind of thinking like, when I grew up in Bloomington, Illinois, and, kind of typical middle-class neighborhood. And I was thinking, we would have neighbors that would have, we were Republicans, so we'd have our George, H.W. Bush sign out, or Jim Edgar, or, whoever. And then the neighbor would have their Democratic sign. And I remember we would kind of tease each other a little bit, like in good fun, but we didn't really actually care, right? Nobody cared like that somebody was voting differently. It's really the dumbest thing to pick a friend on is their view of the role of federal government, right? I want to pick a friend based on who I like to hang out with, who actually helps me as a person, not because somebody has the same theory of what the top tax rate should be. It's kind of the weirdest thing that we've done. And, and I don't know. And this is, Jason, why I think is so important is just, again, there are a lot of people I think out there, and probably a number of people that are watching that don't realize that they also get their identity based in their political affiliation. Many people on the left do as well, and people on the right, and even people that are centrist, like get their identity basically on being this independent centrist. And ultimately, we all have to work through kind of, looking at our own soul, I guess, deeply and figuring out who we are, who we want to be, what we want to be known for. And I've got to tell you, man, I mean, I knew your story. So just so everybody knows, Rich Lowe just introduced us. Jason knows Rich very well with leaving MAGA. As you guys know, I'm going to be doing an Ask Me Anything with Rich next week. So I knew your story, and I actually had heard your name prior to this in all of this. And, the thing that impresses me is just your honesty, your ability to come to real terms with what happened, and your ability to actually have looked into a dark place and say, I need to do better. And there are so many people out there, by the way, that can't do that, that haven't done that, that end up kind of, maybe they don't drink from sunrise to sunset, but they end up kind of numbing their lives or their consciousness with something else. And next thing you know, you're 90 years old on your deathbed and you didn't have time for anything but anger, right? Anger or division or selfishness or whatever. And I got to tell you, man, you have come, uh, I think, a significant amount of the way, having looked where you into the kind of the abyss you were looking in, into where you're in now. And I think your story is extremely important to tell to people, and I'm extremely grateful for you having done that. Is there anything else, kind of at the end here that you want to say, you want to leave people with? I'd love to have you back and chat again sometime too. And I think you should consider, frankly, if not necessarily in a book, in a longer story form, kind of writing your story down for other people. Because I think even outside of the politics, just your ability to have kind of looked into the abyss and made the decision is helpful to people. But is there anything you'd like to kind of leave folks with about you, about MAGA, about anything?
Yeah, actually, I was, the writer I brought up, Brendan Fellows. I don't have social media anymore, but I'd like to maybe use this interview to give him a little shout out. Because while talking with Rich Logis, I did try to go back to social media with leaving MAGA, and it's just too toxic though. And I was on it for like a week, and I connected with Brendan Fellows, and he told me that he knew my story and he read about me when he was in jail, and but we didn't go back and forth, and I deleted Twitter. And so it's like, if he does see this interview, just want Brendan, if you got friends, and if you think they won't be your friends if you stop supporting Trump, then they're not your real friends. And leaving MAGA is theirs for him. It's for anyone who's engulfed in it and having doubts. You can just, there's no harm in looking at leaving MAGA. You can just look at it online. No one will know. And that was something I was looking to do.
Look, and I want to say this to everybody watching too. If consider donating to leaving MAGA. I mean, Rich is doing this on a shoestring budget. And it's really, again, I cannot overstress, because I've been through it. Now, I wasn't a MAGA guy, but I've been through like what it means to lose that social connection through politics. It is having a place like that for people to be able to go to and realize you're not the crazy one, you're not alone, is, I think it's a difference between life and death for some people, quite honestly. It's also the difference between, does somebody relent and go back to MAGA because they need that social connection? We're social people. So I would encourage anybody out there, if it's just $10, or if you can, an uncomfortable check or donation to Rich at leaving MAGA. I talk to him all the time. I can tell you he's not wasting money. He's using it on the right things. So consider that. Well, Jason, look, man, it was an honor to chat with you, and I'm glad we could make this happen. And I want you and I personally to just stay in touch, even beyond this, obviously. And I just want to say I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing your story. And I'm really glad. I'm really happy that you are in a place now where you feel much more content. You're happy. You're not drinking. Your marriage is fixed, or better. Nobody's marriage is ever fixed, by the way. It's better. And, and you got a job you like. So I just want to say thank you. And I'm really happy for you and proud of you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.